Lewis Nixon was asleep when a call came ordering him back to regimental headquarters. Richard Winters tried repeatedly to wake him, but Nixon resisted, asking to be left alone. When Winters finally poured what he thought was beer over him, Nixon sprang awake in anger before Winters realized that the liquid was Nixon's own urine. At headquarters, the officers learned that the Allied position remained dangerously exposed. The failure to secure Antwerp had left the army short of supplies, while German forces still occupied the far side of the Rhine. Colonel Sink introduced Nixon and Lieutenant Frederick Moose Heiliger to Colonel Doby of the British 1st Airborne Division. The British had lost 8,000 men during the failure of Operation Market Garden, and many of those who survived were still trapped behind German lines. The Dutch resistance was hiding approximately 140 British paratroopers in woods north of the Rhine. Doby had crossed the river himself the previous night and confirmed that the proposed landing point was suitable. At midnight, the stranded soldiers would gather near the river and signal the rescue force by flashing the letter V with a red torch. The Canadians had supplied 6 boats. An Easy Company had been selected to carry out the mission, which had been named Operation Pegasus. Sink ordered Heiliger to choose his men and prepare the rescue. Winters, meanwhile, was burdened with reports, equipment inventories, and other administrative work connected to his new duties at battalion headquarters. Sink wanted an account of the recent operation, as well as an inventory of all supplies abandoned by the British 43rd Division. Although Winters understood the importance of the work, he missed being in the field with Easy Company. Along the front, Easy's veterans helped the newest replacements become accustomed to life near the enemy. Some of the newcomers looked so young that the older soldiers joked that they had never shaved. The men settled into their positions, watched the surrounding countryside, and tried to enjoy the rare quiet moments. Floyd Talbot had acquired a dog named Trigger, which briefly gave the soldiers something harmless to talk about. The calm ended when Private Alley returned badly wounded after encountering German fire near a crossroads. The medics placed him on a table, removed his boots, and elevated his injured leg while Liebgott applied sulfur powder. Alley was confused and repeatedly asked where he was and what had happened. The other men soon learned that a German MG-42 had opened fire near the crossroads. Lieutenant Harry Welsh assembled a squad to investigate. The German machine gun appeared to be firing toward headquarters, even though the target was several miles away. Its position made little sense, and the Americans suspected that the Germans were either careless or attempting to lure them forward. Welsh led the men cautiously into position, established a fallback point, and deployed the mortars. The squad spread out along both sides, while another group prepared to attack the machine gun directly. At Welsh's signal, the Americans opened fire. They killed 7 Germans in the initial exchange, but it quickly became clear that they had encountered far more than a small patrol. German soldiers occupied the dike and were protected by a solid embankment, while Easy Company was exposed in a ditch below them. The enemy could outflank the Americans along the dike as soon as they recognized the opportunity. There was also a ferry crossing nearby, which raised the possibility that an entire German battalion was in the area. Winters arrived and realized that retreating would allow the Germans to move against the battalion command post. He divided the force into 3 groups. Talbot took 10 men along the dike, Peacock led another 10 around the left flank, and Winters prepared to advance up the center with the remaining men. Back at headquarters, Nixon continued hiding alcohol in his footlocker, even though he was now a captain and no longer needed to conceal it as carefully. He joked that perhaps the front line was the ideal place to stop drinking, then raised his glass anyway. Winters remained occupied with his written report, trying to turn the battle into a clear official account while the fighting continued nearby. Before the attack, the men fixed bayonets and waited for red smoke. One soldier moved too soon, forcing the others to follow before the proper signal. Winters drove them forward, shouting for them to select their targets and maintain their fire. As they advanced, the Americans discovered another entire German company behind the first defensive line. Winters called battalion and requested reinforcements and artillery. He carefully corrected the artillery coordinates, bringing the shells down 200 yards and 100 yards to the left. The rounds struck the Germans in the open and caused heavy casualties. Some prisoners claimed they were Polish conscripts. But the Americans were suspicious because the troops were serving in an SS formation. German artillery soon answered. The incoming shells landed around the Crossroads, forcing Easy Company to take cover. Boyle was wounded and cried out in shock that the Germans had hit him. Liebgott was also struck, but initially refused to admit it. Winters noticed his injury and ordered him to surrender his weapon and ammunition. Liebgott protested, but Winters discovered that he had only one round remaining. 11 German prisoners had already been captured, and Winters knew that poorly guarded captives might overpower their escorts. He ordered that every prisoner be brought back alive and divided into smaller groups when they reached battalion headquarters. The men obeyed, although the strain of battle had left some of them angry enough to take revenge. The attack had shattered 2 full companies of SS troops. Approximately 50 Germans were dead, perhaps another 100 were wounded, and several groups had surrendered. Easy Company had suffered 22 wounded and 1 man killed. The dead soldier was Dukeman, who had fallen while attempting to move a machine gun onto the right flank. The victory had come at a high price elsewhere. The 363rd Volksgrenadier Division attacked off Houston at roughly the same time, and the 3rd Battalion suffered badly. Major Oliver Horton was killed while organising the defence of the 2nd Battalion command post. After the fighting, Colonel Sink asked Winters how he would feel about helping to command a battalion. Sink believed Colonel Strayer needed assistance and appointed Winters as executive officer of the 2nd Battalion. Winters was a skilled tactician and a respected combat leader, and Sink assured him that the administrative burden could be managed. When Winters was asked who should take command of Easy Company, he immediately recommended Moose Heiliger. The promotion gave Winters privileges he had never enjoyed in the field, including an orderly named Zielinski who could bring him coffee and bacon sandwiches. Yet as Winters sat behind a desk labouring over reports, Nixon could see that he longed to return to Easy. His thoughts remained with the company, especially as Heiliger prepared for his first major mission as its commander. Operation Pegasus was ready to begin. Easy had trained with the boats, and Colonel Dobie Welsh and the Canadians understood their assignments. The plan required 3 crossings to bring all 140 British soldiers back over the Rhine. Winters reminded Heiliger that speed would be essential. He told him to keep moving, remain at the front, and lead the way. Although Winters had confidence in him, he was clearly uneasy about watching Easy go into danger without him. Under cover of darkness, Heiliger led the rescue force to the river. The Americans secured the boats and crossed into German-held territory. On the far bank, the British survivors emerged from their hiding places and approached the rendezvous point. One British officer expressed his relief at seeing an American paratrooper and then returned to collect the remainder of his men. Heiliger and his soldiers ferried the stranded troops across the Rhine in several trips. The operation proceeded with remarkable efficiency, and the Americans brought the British soldiers safely back without alerting the Germans. The rescued paratroopers greeted the men of Easy Company with gratitude and celebrated their return. They praised Heiliger and the 101st Airborne for allowing the Red Devils to survive and fight another day. The gathering ended with toasts to Easy Company, victory, and Currahee. Winters spoke privately with Heiliger about commanding Easy. He reminded him that before Winters there had been Meehan and Sobel, but Winters had been the company's only commander with extensive combat experience. Heiliger came from another company and did not share the same history as the men he now led. Winters advised him to remain firm, train his new platoon leaders, and place his trust in the non-commissioned officers. They were the men who understood what Easy had endured and who could hold the company together. Not long afterward, Heiliger was walking near the American lines when a nervous sentry challenged him. Moose identified himself, but the frightened soldier fired before recognizing him. The bullet struck Heiliger, and the sentry immediately realized his terrible mistake. He apologized repeatedly while the men called for Welsh and a stretcher. Heiliger remained conscious as the medics treated him, but several morphine syrettes had already been administered. No one could remember whether he had received 2 doses or 3, and the medic could not find the empty syrettes pinned to his jacket as procedure required. The uncertainty angered the senior medical personnel because an overdose could kill him as surely as the bullet. Haliger was a large, strong man, which gave him a chance, but his injuries were serious and his recovery would be difficult. With Haliger removed from command, Easy Company received another new commander, Lieutenant Norman Dyke. The company was at only 65% strength, and most of its ranks were filled with replacements. The men soon nicknamed Dyke Foxhole Norman because he frequently disappeared when they needed him. The officers expected several quiet months of training before a final advance into Germany, but the only force truly holding Easy together was its experienced non-commissioned officers. Bill Guarnere returned from hospital without authorization and visited Winters at headquarters. He was surprised to see his former commander behind a desk, though they both suspected that Winters' ability would eventually take him even higher. Guarnere brought a letter from Haliger confirming that he was recovering, although the road ahead would be difficult. The men expected the coming weeks to be peaceful. They planned a Christmas Day football game against the 502nd and searched for places where they could drink and enjoy themselves. General Taylor had travelled to Washington, leaving General McAuliffe in command. Sink was in Reims, Strayer was expected to remain in London for another week, and Nixon was preparing to visit Airborne. Winters was given a 48-hour pass to Paris because his friends believed he needed some civilization after months of combat. While the officers made plans, Easy Company's men relaxed by watching a film. They joked about which branch of the military was toughest, argued over scenes they had already watched many times, and shouted at one another to be quiet. Skip Muck joked he had returned after spending time at home in Tonawanda and repaid the $60 he had borrowed. He had won a considerable sum gambling and planned to waste most of it in Paris. Buck Compton also returned, but the others could see that he had changed. He had recovered physically from 4 wounds, yet something remained wrong beneath the surface. He sat quietly and watched the film, while the others tried to draw him into their jokes. The entertainment ended abruptly when an officer ordered the room to be silent. The German 1st and 6th SS Panzer Divisions had broken through in the Ardennes, overrunning positions held by the American 28th and 4th Infantry Divisions. Every pass was cancelled. Officers were ordered to report to their headquarters, while enlisted men were sent back to their barracks and platoon leaders. Easy Company had almost no time to prepare. Colonel Strayer had not returned, and Lieutenant Dyke was nowhere to be found when Winters began organising the deployment. The company lacked winter clothing and did not have enough ammunition. Winters ordered Dyke to search the entire base and collect every available piece of equipment. They needed K rations because no one could guarantee resupply once they reached the front. Whatever ammunition remained had to be divided so that every man carried something. The soldiers loaded onto trucks in clothing entirely unsuitable for a winter campaign. Many had no heavy coats, proper gloves, or sufficient socks. Guarnere reminded the younger men that they needed at least 4 pairs because spare socks could help protect their feet, hands, neck, and groin from the cold. The veterans asked one another for ammunition, cigarettes, hats, and winter clothing, but there was little to share. The column travelled through the night without knowing exactly where it was going. The blackout was not even in effect, suggesting that the Luftwaffe was no longer considered a serious threat. Some men missed the familiar C-47 transport aircraft and joked uneasily about making a tailgate jump from the trucks. Their humour concealed the obvious question, how were they expected to fight without enough ammunition? When the trucks finally stopped, the men climbed out into bitter cold. Someone remarked that they could not be in hell because hell would not be so cold. They smoked, relieved themselves beside the road, and waited for instructions. They had arrived in Belgium. Their destination was Bastogne, a strategically vital crossroads town connected by 7 major roads. Those roads were ideal routes for German armour, and Eisenhower wanted the 101st Airborne to prevent the enemy from using them. The division would establish a perimeter around Bastogne and dig in. The 1st Battalion would hold the north, the 3rd would remain in reserve, and the 2nd Battalion would occupy its assigned portion of the perimeter. The shortage of ammunition alarmed Winters, but the orders were clear. Easy Company had to beg, borrow, or steal whatever it needed and defend its ground. As the paratroopers moved toward the front, they encountered exhausted American soldiers fleeing in the opposite direction. Some were dazed, wounded, or missing equipment. They warned Easy Company that their units had been slaughtered and urged the paratroopers to escape while they still could. The men of Easy refused to turn back. Instead, they asked the retreating soldiers to hand over their ammunition and grenades. A vehicle suddenly arrived carrying badly needed supplies. Lieutenant George Rice of the 10th Armored Division had located an ammunition dump and brought everything he could carry. The paratroopers crowded around the vehicle, taking rifle ammunition, grenades, and mortar rounds. Rice explained that the retreating units had been struck by everything the Germans possessed: Tiger and Panther tanks, self-propelled guns, Stukas, artillery, and waves of infantry. He promised to make another supply run, although he warned them not to depend on his return. Rice also reported that a German panzer division was close to cutting the road south. If that happened, the 101st Airborne would be completely surrounded. The warning did not trouble the men of Easy Company as much as he expected. They had arrived cold, poorly equipped, and dangerously short of ammunition, but they were paratroopers. As far as they were concerned, being surrounded was exactly where they were supposed to be. Was Crossroads your favorite episode in the Band of Brothers series? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed the comic strip, please take a moment and hit the like and subscribe.